Now to the week that was, a week that forced Nigeria to once again look unblinkingly at itself. At the heart of electoral reform, confusion reigns. Did the Senate reject real-time electronic transmission of results or quietly approve it? Civil society says it's non-negotiable. Senator Adeniyi Abaribe now insists it was approved, but the damage to public trust may already be done. In the area of security, it's once again written in blood as the government reacted again. An army battalion deployed to Kwara after a mass killing in Woro. In Kaduna, abducted church worshippers are freed. Relief, yes, but against a backdrop of relentless violence. And beneath it all, and beyond Nigeria's borders, desperate young Nigerians, desperate, jobless, hopeful, reportedly lured with promises of dollars and visas to Russia, only to find themselves on the front lines of the war in Ukraine with deadly consequences. And finally, optics on the global stage. Nigeria's First Lady, Oluremi Tinubu, attends a national prayer breakfast in the United States, where she was publicly acknowledged by President Trump. Was it a gesture of diplomatic respect or simply ceremony without consequence? So what ties all this together? Is Nigeria fixing problems or managing decline? Well, joining me now to dissect these developments and to break down the week that was are two top-notch commentators, and they are the legislative consultant and public policy analyst, Dr. Chibuzo Okereke, and the political and current affairs commentator and professor of communications at Baze University in Abuja, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Let me come to you first, Professor Abiodun. If the Senate truly approved real-time electronic transmission of results, why has the process produced more confusion than confidence? And who benefits from that ambiguity? Briefly.
Obviously, no one benefits, Charles, because oftentimes we celebrate the longevity, the fact that democracy has stayed 26 years, but we've also highlighted the fact that the bane of our democracy is electioneering. The fact that we are so vociferous about it, and the fact that it's always contested, always disputed. And it is disputed because there's no transparency. I mean, it's often, we find it difficult to conduct free, fair, credible and transparent election. The major problem we have identified. And we have also said that to grow our democracy, to consolidate it, to make it much more imbued with integrity, we need to do everything possible to make it open, transparent, credible. And one way to do this is the ramping up of technology into the process. So whenever citizens see anything that appears to deviate from that trajectory, it becomes very concerning. And that's why the communication that came out from the Senate was very disturbing until we started having some kind of problems with semantic, and people started wondering that, is it a matter of inappropriate communication, miscommunication, and such other things. As we speak now, I think there's still a bit of confusion. There's no clarity yet. But what we definitely want is an election. We want those houses, the two houses, to come up to have a consensus where the election will be transparent. And how can this be done? Through instantaneous rendition of results, where it will not be shrouded in secrecy, such that within the process, there will be chances of manipulation. And anything we can do to make sure this does not happen, where transparency is engendered, I think we should just do it if we want to grow the credibility of the electioneering process.
Dr. Okereke, in a democracy already strained by mistrust, as Professor said there, does uncertainty around electoral rules pose as much danger as outright rejection? If so, how damaging is this to preparations for 2027? And you particularly have good knowledge of the National Assembly.
Yeah. So, Charles, I don't know what the lawmakers were doing at a closed-door section, considering or harmonizing their position on Electoral Act reform. Actually, a closed-door session is not a legitimate assembly that contribute to lawmaking. It's actually for consensus building. And if you have a position that tallies with the position of the Nigerian people, you shouldn't have gone into a closed-door session to deliberate what is not classified and what is not a national security issue. So I think the Senate President was emphatic that they didn't scrap electronic transmission, rather they retain the current provision in section 65 that still allows INEC to exercise discretion on it, which is the challenge. People say we don't want discretion for INEC, we want mandatory transmission, and we have to be careful because there is politics of lawmaking, there's also chamber politics, and I think most of the opposition members didn't understand the chamber politics involved in this process, and that was why they went into closed-door session, and when they came back they reported progress without stating what that progress was, and now they are waiting for vote and proceedings, which is another thing altogether. So when you are saying real time, we have to be sure so we don't enter another challenge. If you say real time, define real time in the interpretation clause. Let's know what you mean by real time, because we are not voting electronically. So how are we going to transmit? So real time, is it after the presiding officer had finished the collation, posted the result, and it transmits? So what I see here is that we should not leave it to discretion. Following from the court position in the 2023 election, we need mandatory transmission of result and also align it with the provision in section 47 of the Electoral Act with accreditation. Today in Nigeria, if you don't accredit electronically, that election will be nullified in that polling unit. But it's not so for electronic transmission of result, and that should change, and which is what people should be advocating. Because if you put a mix and you don't understand the mix, then when you go to court, you will still say our judicial, our jurisprudence on electoral matters is still faulty. Yeah.
Okay, well, we're going to have to watch and see what happens. Let's turn to security. Prof, the Kwara State mass killing and the freed Kaduna abductees. What does the massacre in Woro and the subsequent deployment of an army battalion tell us about Nigeria's current security doctrine? Reactive, containment, or preventive intelligence?
I think there's a problem in the mix, and on the face of it, you may want to be happy that some have been released in Kaduna, but what kind of release is that? At what cost? Is there any guarantee that it will not happen again? The perpetrators, these criminals, being brought to book? No. You're just worried. What kind of a release was arranged? Were they able to arrange? But on the face of it, you may just feel okay. We may feel gratified that after all, they've come out of captivity. But what measures are we taking to prevent it going into the future? What is the guarantee, once more, that our security agencies will be responsive enough, irrespective of the many good efforts, the sacrifices that they are making? Then, of course, the Kwara one is even worse, And Kwara is not new for this. We've had instances before. But what it points out in all of this is just that we have a nation where professionals, where citizens are not committed, to nationhood. There's a marked absence of commitment. Because if you look at all the reports we've had, it just tells us that there were some dereliction of duty, slow ability to respond. And of course, there was betrayal in one instance where somebody had to go and leak information to the criminals. That's also very important. The absence of commitment, lethargy to work. Then again, the question of infiltration of our borders. Who are these criminals? Where are they coming from? Are they Nigerians? Are they resident in Kwara State, or they're just coming in from contiguous states or from contiguous countries? What are we doing about these things? If we're not careful, one is not being pessimistic. It looks like a narrative that might continue. Because I really doubt if we are ready to deal with these fellows. But overall, we have to commend the immediate actions that have been taken. But what is the bottom line, however, is that these things should be prevented from the world.
Okay. Let me come to you, Dr. Okereke. We've got freed abductees in Kaduna, but fresh killings elsewhere. Are we winning isolated battles but losing the wider war, or is the state simply managing insecurity rather than defeating it?
Well, I think we can rightly say that we'll be managing, insecurity, because you cannot have a central structure that is commanded from Abuja to deal with over 900,000 square kilometer, a place where when an incident happened, the chief executive of the state will need to come to Abuja to explain the details of those things before, certain actions are taken. We have been shouting that we need to democratize our policing system, and the president as much accepted so. We need to follow this up with the right political will. We need to get the local authorities to key in, to understand. And then we have to also see the business of insecurity, where it has become the commerce of certain individuals. And several times we have said, oh, there are some people who are responsible for sponsoring this, and we must take decisive action because they are doing a lot of harm to our economy, to the lives and property of citizens, and is a big challenge.
Right.
And that ability to craft a strategy that you're able to step away from the managing posture. Most of the service chiefs say, we want to go on offensive. I don't know what is the challenge today, but again, we cannot effectively do this alone from Abuja. We need to have local capacity built, get them involved in intelligence, and even immediate quick response to be able to tackle this. Yeah.
Indeed. Now, let's go to those Nigerian youths, Prof, who we are told are being lured into the Ukraine war. What does it say about Nigeria's economy and social safety net that young men would risk foreign wars for the promise of survival? And who bears responsibility for that desperation?
I think it's a narrative that is continuing. It's not something that is new. We know how citizens, especially young ones, have externalized hope, how they have lost hope in the system, and of course, any form of encouragement, any form of notch, they jump at it. Even professionals are also involved. Of course, there are stories of our medical doctors preferring foreign countries, rightly or wrongly. So it's part of the narrative that is continuing. But what can you do about it? We have to grow our system, increase citizens' ability to believe in their own system. Even the elites, most of the time, often work towards having a plan B country, because of their faithlessness in this system. So if the power elites, the economic elites, share in this belief, then what do you expect of the youth that are still growing up? People who are yet to find, who have not been able to find jobs many years after graduating. So any form of encouragement, any form of nudge, they dive at it, they embrace it, and that's why we're seeing what is happening in Russia.
Right.
But I think maybe in the circumstance, government might want to be interested in it, so that we'll find immediate ways of discouraging them from going ahead to die.
We've got a gallop ahead, I'm afraid, and this story remains largely underreported here in Nigeria. Is this failing to protect its citizens abroad, or failing to tell its own people the truth about the dangers they face?
So our barometer, the last barometer report we released in August last year shows that the National Assembly paid only 2% of legislative attention to global geopolitics and international issues, which is worrisome looking at our standing in West Africa and Africa. And with this kind of report, we should expect the government to take interest, investigation to be opened up immediately in the National Assembly to understand, because it's even beyond the actions of individual Nigerians. Yeah. This could also be orchestrated by a syndicate group trying to take advantage of socio-economic crisis within our system and exploit our people, because we know trafficking is a big issue around this.
That's a good point, and our report that was done on this was forwarded to the National Assembly. Now let's turn to Remi Tinubu. That's our final topic, and that Donald Trump recognition moment, let me call it that. Does President Trump's public recognition of Nigeria's First Lady carry any diplomatic or political weight, or are we reading symbolism into a moment that means little in real terms?
No, I think it carries some weight. Diplomacy is multifaceted. Sometimes it could be hard, sometimes it could be soft. In the circumstance, I doubt if we can have an edge over the United States in the hard section of it. But now it has been approached. I'm not sure it was actually planned, but it was just something that was probably serendipitous, and it paid us at the end of the day. So it was a good moment for Nigeria, coming from against the background of a situation where we have a president who has sort of disparaged Nigeria, saying Nigeria is victimizing Christians, and here we have a Christian wife, of a Muslim president. So it was more than just something you can say is immaterial. It was consequential, and I think it was a good moment for us.
For you, we are, of course, in an era where optics matter. In that regard, should Nigerians interpret this as soft power, personal visibility, or simply a ceremonial footnote with no policy implications? Briefly.
No, I think this is a soft power diplomacy in play, because faith-based diplomacy is big an international stage today. And you see,
especially in America.
Especially in America, and in today's America. There are a lot of dignitaries in that 74th national prayer. The president of America could have chosen to mention anybody, but he chose the First Lady of Nigeria. I think there is something about it. The First Lady also has been strategic in deploying faith-based diplomacy in most of our activities, especially in the U.S. It's now how we utilize these optics to be able to push policy and diplomacy that matters.
Thank you very much for keeping it brief, Dr. Chibuzo Okereke and Professor Abiodun Adeniyi. Thank you ever so much. That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again next week. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, bye-bye, and thank you for watching.